first chant that we'll do, the words are very simple. I want only thee, Lord, thee, only thee. I want only thee, Lord, thee, only thee.
I affright you, all things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone, all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone, all we ever need. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you. All things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more.
Nayaswami just chant. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again.
From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. From joy I came, for joy I live. In sacred joy I melt again. meditate now for about 10 minutes. Trying to bring forth that inner joy that is within you. Try to feel that as we meditate. Welcome to our evening dedicated to wisdom from Autobiography of a Yogi. My name is Nayaswami Devarshi. This is Brahmachari Jemal here. And sharing some passages from this great book. This here is the original edition of Autobiography of a Yogi, published first in 1946. And many people read this book only once or twice. And give it more due than that if you only have read it once or twice. I have a friend who reads it every year. They say that every year Yoganandaji performs a miracle. And the miracle he performs is that every time they read the book again, he puts in new material that they know was not in there before. And of course they're only joking. It's only that their perception has changed. They perhaps have grown spiritually, their awareness has grown. And so for the first time they realize, oh, this is really an important statement, and they might have just passed it over before because they were reading it as part of a story or some miracle or some event. So this evening, I'm going to start talking about one of the great themes and threads throughout this book. And this is the concept of God as divine joy, as divine bliss. I just did a search of the book before I came here, and there are about 200 mentions of joy and bliss in this book, all of them in the context of divine joy, divine bliss, and ecstasy. So I'll just touch on a couple of these passages.
Yoganandaji writes about his experience in cosmic consciousness. An oceanic joy broke upon calm, endless shores of my soul. The Spirit of God, I realized, is exhaustless bliss. His body is countless tissues of light. And so, this picks up something that Swami Kriyanandaji often spoke about. He said it most clearly near the end of his life. He said that God is feeling. And then, of course, he added that feeling is Satchidanandam, ever new, ever conscious, ever existing, divine bliss. And he went on to say, and I'll paraphrase and go on from there, that God is not a philosophy, God is not thought, God is feeling. And so to tune into the divine, one must work with divine feeling. This is why Patanjali said that yoga is the neutralization of the waves of feeling of the heart. And he didn't say that this is killing the waves of feeling of the heart. He said it's neutralizing the waves of feeling so that you can tune into the divine with pure, calm feeling. Yoganandaji said that we perceive God through intuition, and he defined intuition as calm feeling. And so God is bliss, and that bliss is a divine feeling. Again, it's not a concept, it's not an idea. In Yoganandaji's poem Samadhi, that experience that he had of cosmic consciousness, it was all about divine bliss. I'll read just the short mentions of joy and bliss in that poem. He begins by saying, vanished the veils of light and shade, lifted every vapor of sorrow, sailed away all dawns of fleeting joy. And so he talks about the fleeting joys of this world. And then another line, melting in the vast sea of bliss. And then another stanza, smoldering joy, oft puffed by meditation, blinding my tearful eyes, burst into immortal flames of bliss. And then he goes on, enjoyable beyond imagination of expectancy, samadhi bliss. And I could read a few more, but you get the idea. That the experience of cosmic consciousness is not an idea, it's not a thought, it's not a concept. It is deep feeling, and that feeling is the feeling of divine bliss. Even the different aspects of God, and I'll touch on God as cosmic sound. Yoganandaji even there says that that sound has a component of divine bliss behind it, the way he puts it in Autobiography of a Yogi. Patanjali speaks of God as the actual cosmic sound of Om, heard in meditation. Om is the creative word, the sound of the vibratory motor. Even the yoga beginner soon inwardly hears the wondrous sound of Om. Receiving this blissful spiritual encouragement, the devotee becomes assured that he is in actual touch with divine realms. And again, even there, the sound of Om, the quality underlying it is blissful encouragement. And those who have heard this beautiful sound, it is blissful, it is enjoyable, it is the most beautiful vibration and sound that one can ever hear. And so as you read this book sometime, the next time, tune into this thread woven through it of divine joy, of divine bliss. And now Jemal will share another passage.
This certainly is one of my favorite books, and it is because that I get a feeling of bliss, of joy, simply by reading it, that oftentimes things in here are of such a high spiritual nature that we don't understand them, but we know that we understand that feeling of joy when we come across something good. And so the reading that I want to start with is something that can tell us how do we accomplish this state of joy, or how do we go about achieving this state of joy in our lives. That we all know that we want that, but sometimes it seems a little bit out of our reach and we're not quite sure how to go about it. So let me read this. Only the shallow man loses responsiveness to the woes of others' lives as he sinks into narrow suffering of his own. The one who practices a scalpel self-dissection will know an expansion of universal pity. Release is given him from the deafening demands of his ego. So what this is saying here is that only the shallow man loses responsiveness to the woes of others' lives as he sinks into narrow suffering of his own. And so the way out of suffering is to have compassion, is to not only feel for other people, but get engaged in other people's lives and actively try to be a channel for God and try to help other people. And if we can do that, we forget about ourselves. And it sounds like it won't work, but it does work. That the more that we help others, the more we get out of ourselves, and the more we begin in time to feel our oneness with other human beings, and that we are in them as much as we are within ourselves. And in that state, of course, we want to help everyone. And in that way, we begin to get rid of the ego. And getting rid of the ego, the death of the ego, is the birth of joy in our lives. The other part of this is the one who practices a scalpel, self-dissection, will know an expansion of universal pity. And so, one way that we can do this, I hope that many of you listening this evening know the Hong Saw technique, that if we just go inside and practice this simple technique of Hong Saw, that we will begin to see that certain thoughts continually creep in. And if we practice Hong Saw long enough, we'll see that these thoughts have a certain pattern, and these thoughts are rooted in our desires. And if we can begin to understand how these desires influence our thoughts, and how we keep thinking about things outside of ourselves that we think are going to bring us happiness, then we can begin to pierce the veil of Maya, of delusion, and see that nothing outside of ourselves is ever going to bring us happiness. That the only happiness that we're ever going to achieve is by going within and stilling our heart and stilling our mind. And if we can still our heart, then we can learn to feel. And that is what we really want to do, is learn to feel deeply, so that we can learn to feel God's joy deeply. That, as we were saying earlier this evening, that God, He is joy, but He's more of a feeling than a thought. But we have to be able to receive that feeling. We have to be able to open ourselves to that feeling and immerse ourselves. That's the word I was looking for. Immerse ourselves in that feeling of joy and bliss. And I want to say one more thing about this section here. And the final sentence in this was, release is given him from the deafening demands of his ego. You know, I've helped lead a number of retreats and just group meditations and things like this over the years at Ananda. And oftentimes we'll have a morning meditation and then we'll have breakfast in silence. And sometimes there'll be one poor fellow who didn't wake up in the morning and make it to the morning meditation. And he'll come just bustling into the group breakfast that we're having in silence and just start talking loudly as if he was at a family reunion. And he won't notice even that nobody else is talking. He's just a little bit out of tune, and I'm not criticizing anyone. I've been this poor fellow myself sometimes with missing the morning meditation, and they're talking and everybody shh. But it's like that the ego, that it can get this grasp on us where we don't even realize what we're doing. But the way to release that grasp comes from God's grace. That actually there's nothing that we can do on our own 100% to get ourselves out of this game. Yes, we have to try. Yes, we have to make every effort. But in the final analysis, it's God's grace who enters in and releases us from the deafening demands of ego. A beautiful line, isn't it? A beautiful way with words that Yoganandaji has. And so if you can imagine that the charcoal, that it doesn't become glowing all by itself. That fire has to enter into the charcoal. And then once it enters in, then it glows and burns on its own. And in that same way, in that analogy, we need to let God enter into our hearts, enter into every aspect of our being. We need to feel that we are permeated with God and with His joy. And once He enters in, then we become a channel for us for that. And then it becomes absolutely natural for us to remember. And slowly we begin to remember on the spiritual path, oh yes, I am that joy. It is my true nature. So now I'll hand it over. Thank you.
In the chapter on Kriya Yoga, Yoganandaji writes, the yogi offers his labyrinthine human longings to a monotheistic bonfire dedicated to the unparalleled God. This is indeed the true yogic fire ceremony, in which all past and present desires are fuel consumed by love divine. And so Yoganandaji, he's talking about how to get free of attachments, get free of our desires, get free of bondage. And he's talking about not just the Kriya Yoga technique, the inner fire ceremony and fire rite that he taught and that Lahiri Mahashaya spoke of as the real fire ceremony. It's also, in a way, everything that we do can be an offering, a self-offering into the monotheistic bonfire of divine love. And when we offer our lives in that way, our little self is consumed in this divine bliss, this divine love. And the ego is not lost, the ego is not destroyed. In a way, it's just transmuted and it's broken from its little bottle of containment and released into the bliss, the expansiveness of the divine. This is what Kriya Yoga does for us. It's a technique also, but more than that, it's an inner fire ceremony of offering our aspirations, our desires, our attachments into the light of divine love and divine bliss. This is why Swami Kriyanandaji said that every Kriya should be an act of devotional self-offering. And he said every single one, every time those of you who know the Kriya technique should see it as offering ourselves into the light of divine love, into that fire. And you will find that over the years, inexorably, these desires, these attachments, they just naturally fall away. I have a friend, Kriya Yogi, and he was trying to stop eating meat. And it's not that meat eating is one of the worst things that one can do. Yoganandaji was kind to his disciples, especially Americans who were raised on eating meat. He encouraged them to eat less and eventually eliminate it. But this person was trying very hard to stop eating meat, and he's a Kriya Yogi. He said he found that his ability to let go of this desire and attachment that he had only came to fruition after practicing Kriya Yoga for a few years. And he said it happened completely naturally. One day, practicing Kriya and going through his life, suddenly he realized that this desire and this attachment had just fallen away. And he didn't overanalyze it, he accepted it as the grace of God and the Guru. But in fact, what happened on one level was that the practice of Kriya, offering himself into that fire of divine love, that this samskar, this vritti, the seed of karma, was burnt up and dissolved in a very natural way. It wasn't like a intense burning, it wasn't a taking away of any desire or attachment. It just naturally fell away on its own. This is how Kriya Yoga works so naturally with people. And again, it takes our karmas, our desires and attachments, even in the moment, all past and present desires and attachments, as Yoganandaji would write, and offers them into the sea of divine love. And as Jemal was pointing out, when we do this, then divine grace comes and helps us. Swamiji, when he wrote about every Kriya being an act of devotional self-offering, he said in the next paragraph the reason why. He said when we offer ourselves to the divine, then divine grace lifts us up and helps us. Very often near the end of his life, I heard him say that when you lift one hand up to God, the Lord lowers two hands down to lift you up. And our part, very simple, is just to lift that one hand up. And we do that through Kriya Yoga, we do that through seva, through serving others, through helping others. We do that with every kind thought that we have.
For some time it will show this. That means it is
Every aspirational thought that we have. All these things are ways of offering ourselves up, this little self, into the divine self. And every time we do that, just a little bit of karma, a little bit of our little selves is dissolved and burnt away. And this is the beauty of watching the lives of yogis and Kriya yogis, devotees of God, is that just naturally over time, just like a fruit becoming ripe and then falling off the tree when it finally ripens in a very natural, seamless way. This is what you see happening to devotees and Kriya Yogis. Their ego just naturally drops from the tree and they become free. And we've seen this many times, and I think all of us who have practiced Kriya for years and decades feel it happening in ourselves every day, every week, every year. And so again, I'll read this passage. The yogi offers his labyrinthine human longings to a monotheistic bonfire dedicated to the unparalleled God. One thing he is saying here is that our longings are labyrinthine, meaning the labyrinth, and they're complex, and it's like being in a maze. And we're offering them to the monotheistic bonfire, the one light of God. Desires, attachments, the human mind, the intellect, is very, very complex. It's endlessly complex. It is like being in a labyrinth or a maze. And God is simple, that God is one. It's the simple fire that we offer ourselves into, and it's the way to freedom. And he says this is indeed the true yogic fire ceremony in which all past and present desires are fueled, consumed by love divine. And this is a beautiful promise, and it's a great and true promise.
Isn't that so wonderful that this is the way that we can get out of desires? Because when we first decide that we want to become better human beings, and that we want to start doing what is right and not doing what is wrong, and we try to reform ourselves, it's like we're washing a shirt in a bucket, that we push one bubble down and then the air bubble comes up over here, and we push that down and it comes up over here, and it seems impossible. How will we ever get out of this trap that we try to make ourselves good over here, and we find out we have this new problem that we didn't even know we have? But as Devarshi Ji was saying, it's this Kriya Yoga, that literally it burns up all of our desires, and it burns them all in that one place, where it all ends up turning into one, and we offer ourselves back to God. Now, speaking of offering ourselves back to God, we all do it when the times are hard, don't we? When things are going a little rough, or they get rough enough, they say there's no atheists in foxholes, that we start praying to God fervently. Oh, I'll never do it again. Oh, God, I love you. Please just help me out of this one this time. But let me read this next passage here in the Autobiography of a Yogi. And these are words. Lahiri Mahashaya often said, if you don't invite God to be your summer guest, He won't come in the winter of your life. And this is what we were just talking about earlier, actually, that in the beginning, our relationship with God, that we're only talking to Him in the winter of our lives, in the dark days. But as we go deeper into a relationship with God, that we start feeling His presence all the time, and we start wanting to be with Him even when times are good, because we enjoy that feeling of God's presence in our lives. And reforming ourselves doesn't turn out to be this Herculean task in the end. That in the end, it actually just gets easier and easier. And we begin to feel God's presence more and more, and we know simply that that's all that we want. That's all that we've ever wanted. And His grace just, it almost seems miraculous that problems just, they disappear and disappear, because we're not so attached to those things anymore. But we're attached to our relationship with God. In this passage, it gives us a clue actually on how to become devotional towards God. It's okay to use the word attached. That's the one attachment that's allowed, is to be attached to God, and it melts all of the other attachments. But the secret that this book is telling us here is that that we want to come back to our own center. That we don't, even when times are good, then we want to enjoy that goodness with God. We don't want to lose God in the goodness of the outer things. So that even if God brings us whatever it is that our heart desires, and what normally happens in the course of a normal human ego is that we get lost in that thing, and then, oh, things are so wonderful now. But if we place that wonderful feeling on that outside thing, it's bound to crash. That all things ultimately, they end and they add up to zero. Isn't that something? It's something to meditate on. It's something that scared me in the beginning, because I thought, well, then why should I even try to do anything? Why, if I'm going to be a success at this, then I'm going to be a failure at that. Why should I even try? And that means I hadn't quite understood this, because we still have to try. That as Krishna told Arjuna, you must fight. That we still have to do our duty, but we have to do it without attachment. That we have to realize that it's God who's doing this through us. And don't be afraid to just withdraw a little bit from that feeling of, I have to do it. I'm not saying don't do your duties. Do your duties. And you'll find anyways that the duties, they're going to happen. And when you start making this cooperative relationship with God, you'll find that He does them through you. And that you'll feel this joy of doing the duties with God. You'll start to feel that you're not the doer. And it's that feeling, as we start at the beginning of this talk with, that is everything. That feeling of cooperating with God and feeling His joy in your life. And in the end, that joy becomes unshakable. That even if you're going through the worst test, you know it's just an outer thing, and that it's really not who you truly are, and that you know that God loves you anyways, and that perhaps it's just a test that He's giving you, that true love is only true once it's been tested. It's unfortunate, but it's just the way that this show goes. But as God tests us, and then as we pass those tests, and as our love comes shining through for Him, brighter and brighter, then we feel it's just Him doing everything. And our inner joy, it can never be shaken. And that we always feel it, and it's always there with us. And we learn how to channel that and share it with others.
We have a few minutes left, and I'm going to read this and say a few words and ask you to meditate on these words going forward the rest of this evening. God wants His children to love everything as a part of Him, and not to feel delusively that death ends all. The ignorant man sees only the unsurmountable wall of death, hiding seemingly forever his cherished friends. But the man of unattachment, he who loves others as expressions of the Lord, understands that at death the dear ones have only returned for a breathing space of joy in Him. And Yoganandaji puts together a few words that seem almost contradictory. He says that the man of unattachment, he defines the man of unattachment, he who loves others as expressions of the Lord. And we think of unattachment or detachment as someone who is either cold or unfeeling to other people's sufferings. Swami Kriyanandaji would joke sometimes about people who would go around saying all is Ram, and they'd see suffering and they'd say all is Ram, all is God, all is God's name. But then when they suffered, they would suddenly say, ouch, I hurt. And that is not detachment. And being unfeeling towards others is not at all detachment. As Yoganandaji, again, I say here, the man of unattachment loves others as expressions of the Lord. And this is the positive way of transcending attachment. If you love others as expressions of God, also your own self. I had an experience one day that made me laugh a great deal, and it may sound egotistical, but we have the practice of bowing and saying namaste. I bow to the light within you. And one morning I woke up and I went to brush my teeth, and there I looked in the mirror, and just spontaneously I bowed and I said, namaste, I bow to the light within you, speaking to my own self. And so I think it's easier to see the light in yourself when you make it a regular daily practice of seeing the light in others, even through their own foibles, their faults, their mistakes. Because you'll find that those who have tolerance for others' faults and mistakes, because they see the light of God shining through that, you start to be kinder to your own self and your own faults and mistakes. You will also find that those who are harsh and judgmental also tend to be hard and judgmental on themselves. Yoganandaji quoted a saying of Christ one time. He said, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." And one of his interpretations was that when it comes the time of passing from this world, that if we judge others harshly for their mistakes, then we will tend to be judged harshly for our own. We will not be so easily forgiven. But really what it is that we are not so easy to forgive ourselves because we've all made mistakes. And if we can be forgiving of others because we see the light of God trying to come out of them, we also, when we see our own reflection in the mirror, we also have compassion for ourselves, our own struggles. And it's easier to see the light of God, the light of the Lord, in ourselves also. And this is really what meditation is. It is offering ourselves into that light and seeing that light, seeing ourselves as part of that light, as being one with that light. This is what samadhi is. It's final divine union with that light. So I'll close again reading this passage as a meditation for this evening, for tomorrow. This daily wisdom app that we'll be putting out soon has these little aphorisms that really are food for a lot of thought and a lot of meditation and insight, but also inspiration. God wants His children to love everything as a part of Him and not to feel delusively that death ends all. The ignorant man sees only the unsurmountable wall of death, hiding, seemingly forever, his cherished friends. But the man of unattachment, he who loves others as expressions of the Lord, understands that at death, the dear ones have only returned for a breathing space of joy in Him. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.